Hi, so welcome to the next, I think it's the fourth part in my Old Man Rambling series. And it's just a series, if anyone still hasn't watched any of the first three, where I'm just trying to explain what makes me tick in World of Warcraft. And it was there to sort of explain what I got from Mythic Raiding, but of course the decision has since been made by me not to do Mythic Raiding in the next expansion, but nonetheless it's still something I enjoy. And it's something that I've prioritised for most of the last 13 years in terms of chief hobbies. And what I'm going to do in this one is explain how I got into World of Warcraft, and from there how I got into sort of serious raiding. So at the time, it came out in North America in late 2004, but it didn't come out in Europe at that time. Now I'd known about it because I've been following it on the news, and I didn't think it was really going to be for me. I'd played Warcraft 1, 2 and 3 and loved this, particularly Warcraft 1 and Warcraft 3. I wasn't such a fan of Warcraft 2. And I still at the time played Warcraft 3 every now and then, as well as a lot of Warhammer and other bits and pieces as well. And then World of Warcraft came out in Europe, and I just didn't get it. You know, it's like, for me, by this time I knew what the internet was like. I had broadband, so that, you know, wouldn't have been a big issue playing it. But it was like, why would I want to play a game with the sort of people that are on the internet? It sounded like a hideous experience to me. And a friend of mine got it, and they liked it, and they said, you should get this, you'll love it. And I basically said, you know, recommendation from a friend, you take a bit more seriously. And I thought, oh, well, can you play a paladin? And he said, yeah. That was a close one, because he was playing an alliance hunter with friends of his own. Now, had he been playing on the Horde side, then, you know, the conversation may have gone, yeah, you can, but then we wouldn't be able to play together, at which point I may have still turned it down. But you could, you know. So the next day I went, after work, I went to the shops to get it. I went to town. This was in the days before digital downloads, and it was also in the days when you didn't just order things from Amazon. You went into town, you went to shops, you know, to buy things. It was still, obviously there was mail order, but, you know, and online shopping even. But it was still much more common to go into a shop. Do shops still exist? I'm just thinking, it's now been so long since I've been into a town centre. For all I know, shops might not even exist anymore. I suppose some still do. Before the onslaught of Amazon just took everything. Oh yeah, you can traipse off into town, get the bus, or you get your car, have the hassle of parking if you're taking your own car, pay money for the privilege, you know, and traipse around trying to find what you want, trying to go into different shops, trying to find the cheapest version. Or do you know what? You could just type it out on Amazon, they'll deliver it tomorrow, and it'll be a damn sight cheaper, and you won't have to park your car. I know which one wins in my book. But anyway, so I got World of Warcraft, and so I created a character. Now, technically the first character is not my main paladin now, because I didn't know where to create it. You know, my friend hadn't got him. He hadn't come back from work. We sort of lived together at the time. He hadn't got back from work, so I didn't know which realm to make it on. So I just made it on a realm just for the hell of it, just to try it out, get myself into it. And then he came back and said, "Oh, we're on this realm, Asjon Nerobit," you know. So then I recreated the paladin on that, which was called Thete from the very beginning. And the reason for Thete, people do ask me this. There was a couple of reasons for it, for the name ever coming into being. It wasn't the first character I'd ever called that. I'd called my Dungeons and Dragons paladin that way back when. And the reason was a couple of things. There was a couple of influences. I mean, largely it's like anything. When you're a kid, you just thought it was a cool name. But I'd picked it up in a couple of places. One was Homer's Iliad. It was a Greek term that I thought, oh, that's quite nice, I like that. But the other thing was, I was a big Doctor Who fan. And there's a particular Doctor Who story called The Armageddon Factor in the 1970s, where it is revealed as the Doctor's nickname at university. So I thought, you know, it was a name that just stuck. So I called my Dungeons and Dragons paladin that. And then later on, when I started playing Baldur's Gate, created a paladin. That's what I called my paladin in it. You know, so it was just the name of my paladin in games where I played a paladin, and that's how it became. So there was no and an R, and you know how it can get with when you're creating characters on World of Warcraft. It's like, oh yes, name taken. Put an X on the end, that's the way to do it. No, name taken. QT on the end, that'll do it. No, name taken. X at the beginning, QT at the end. No. Try a different accent. No. But there was none of that. You know, I wasn't actually the only thief. I found out later on that there was one on another realm. It was a hunter, ironically. But I think that was it. I think, you know, for many years, the only Thetes that existed when the Armory came out and you could search. You know, when I searched, apart from that hunter, the only other Thetes that seemed to exist, at least in Europe, were my own characters. Because sometimes what would happen is, in vanilla, patch day didn't always run smoothly. Sometimes it was not realistically possible to get, because your realm wouldn't be up, but some realms would be up. So what you would do is you get together with friends and you say, well, let's just create a character on Magtheridon or something like that. So you create a character, you know, you take it up to like level 6 or something before your realm would be up, and then you go over there. And I just called all my characters that. So there were a whole load of them. It was like a whole army of bastards that I had spawned all over the place, all with that name. All low-level characters. It's a bit different now. There's more of them now, and I don't know what that's about. But anyway, so when I've got it and I'm playing it, and I was a complete noob to begin with. I remember my very first few days at any rate, and it was in Goldshire. Why do I call it that? This is America's fault. It should be Goldshire, shouldn't it? God, I've just realised I'm using an Americanism myself. Goldshire. It's probably because I've just heard Americans say it all the time. It'd be Goldshire. Goldshire. Because in Britain, we have a lot of places with that on the end. Like I come from Yorkshire, but Americans pronounce it Yorkshire. Then there's Lancashire, Lancashire, and it's one of my guilty pleasures is trying to listen to Americans trying to pronounce Worcestershire sauce, because they always get into a bit of a muddle with it. But anyway, so yeah, Goldshire. I call it Goldshire. Why is that? Okay, anyway, doesn't matter. But I was there, and my friend was playing as well. And some guy just came up and traded me. He was trying to trade me some bags, but I didn't know what was going on. This window opened. It's like, oh, help, what's going on? My friend came over and says, he's trying to trade you some bags. Well, what do I do? What do I do? I don't know what to do. Should we press that bloody button? It was a bit like in the Make Love Not Warcraft, the South Park parody, where, you know, the dad comes up with the sword. He's like, here, how do I trade it to you? I didn't know how to do anything. I knew how to do nothing at all. It was just as well I was playing a paladin, I suppose, because, you know, you didn't have to do a great deal with that anyway. But yeah, I didn't know how to trade. So I had to start learning all this stuff. So I got a book. You know, you get a book. And then I realised when I got this book, was it the Prima Guide or something? I can't remember who did it now. I've still got a copy somewhere. I should have brought it as a prop, shouldn't I? Completely forgot. But I started reading through that. And then I started to realise actually an awful lot of it is out of date. So in the time between that book being written and the here and now. The here and now, by the way, was May. I got it round about my birthday. So it was May 2005. So a hell of a lot of things must have changed. There's a lot of things in there that were just like, no, it's not like this anymore. It included, for example, Tauren Plainsrune. Well, that wasn't, Tauren had mounts, codex mounts. But also a lot of the crafting stuff was very different as well. And I was into my crafting. I was definitely into my crafting. And I had a look at it. And remember, I'd not played any MMOs before. So I had a look at the situation, and I really liked the idea of enchanting, because you could enchant all your gear, make it stronger. That sounded brilliant to me. So I took enchanting. I thought I need something to go alongside it. So I picked tailoring, you know. And people sort of thought it was a little bit weird, a paladin taking tailoring, but it made perfect sense, because the stuff I made with tailoring, I could disenchant it and then use that for enchanting. But, and I've always done this with MMOs even since, I always like to level up my crafting with my character. And it's a very inefficient way of doing it. So, with enchanting, I mean, the tailoring, as I say, I used to disenchant that. So I didn't have to sell the tailoring stuff early on anyway. But I did need to sell the enchanting stuff because I didn't get enough from questing and stuff like that to be able to just keep funding, because I had to buy extra reagents. I never got enough reagents to keep up with it. So I'd always have to buy more, or at least buy greens to disenchant them. So the only way of funding that was to sell enchants. Now, you couldn't just enchant a vellum and put it on the auction house then. There was an auction house, which was only in Ironforge for the Alliance at any rate. There were neutral auction houses, but they were useless. But that was it. It was only in Ironforge. There was no auction house in the other major cities at that time. So, which actually for this purpose was handy, because it meant for me to enchant someone, I physically had to be there. They had to put their item in the not to be traded window, as now, and I had to enchant it there and then as they traded me the whatever silver I was charging. So I spent a lot of time in Ironforge just selling these enchants. At the end of it, when I did get to level 60, I ended up being, I looked at it, it took me 21 game days. Now, although it took a long time to get up 60 levels then compared to now, it didn't take 21 game days. That was me spending masses amount of time just to keep up with my professions. Where a more sensible thing would have been to have got to a level 60, then I could have gone back and soloed a lot of the stuff that would give me the reagents needed. But, you know, that's not how I thought. And it still isn't, to be honest. If I get a new MMO, I still try and level up my professions at the same time. I will still spend time on doing that. It's not like I've realised that it's a silly thing to do. I don't care. I want to level up my professions while I do it. But what then happened is, so to begin with, again in the spirit of not knowing anything, the next major thing I remember was being in Westfall, and I got randomly invited to a group, to a guild, sorry. I thought I was being invited to a group, because what would sometimes happen, you get into an area, someone else was there, you know, it was a lot more sociable then, because it actually helps. Now, nowadays, people bemoan the fact that, you know, people just don't join groups with each other. It's very rare at any rate. It has happened. Actually, it did happen the other day when I was doing the scenario in Darkshore. Someone just randomly joined a group with me. I accepted just because mutual benefit. But it's much rarer now. Other people in the area, bit of a hindrance, even if they're in the same group as you. But at the time, it was actually a help. So I thought someone was just, you know, I saw someone in the area, and it was an area where it would benefit from two people doing it at the same time. So I accepted and then found myself in a guild. And I thought, oh, what's going on here? And then a little bit later, it was a little bit later, it was like an hour later. Obviously, it was one of these that people were setting up and just trying to ram in as many people as they could, and then thinking about what to do with the guild later. And I heard, I was online as well, I heard two people talking in guild about, oh, you know, what should we do? So-and-so's invited all these people. We should kick them, really. I'm just thinking, hang on, I'm here. And then before I knew it, I'd been kicked from the guild. I'm like, okay, easy come, easy go. I eventually joined another guild, again, just for levelling purposes, but it was a dead guild. What was it called? It's called Shadow Warriors or something. It's completely dead. There was virtually no, even at peak times, virtually no one online. The only person that was ever online was a paladin, a female dwarf paladin. Hardly ever seen any of these things. They're amazing, though. Who used to help me out, because I was a tailor. He used to give me cloth and stuff like that, which was really helpful. So I quite like that. But as I was getting closer to level cap, I realised, and I don't know how, to this day, I cannot remember how I knew this, because I'd never experienced MMOs before, but I sort of knew, even when I was in my level 50s and approaching level 60, that raiding was a thing. I must have read about it somewhere, but I don't know. I don't remember. And that I would need to be in an organised guild. And I realised the guild I was in was not, because most of the time there was no one on. And when there was someone, it was like this one guy usually. So I actively went out to try and find an active guild. So I did, and I joined that. And it's weird, actually. I can't remember the name of that guild. Strange. Anyway, so I joined this guild, and it was over the summer 2005. There was an awful lot of you know, interesting things, but what I noticed was quite quickly became a disadvantage. First of all, there was a lot of cliqueiness in it. To begin with, it seemed great. You know, we got into runs and dungeons and stuff like that. It was all seemed fine. But then there was a little bit of cliqueiness. For example, they were going to do a Molten Core group with another guild and go there. And someone whispered to me, "Oh, you should probably not come along because you're not really ready for it," which was probably true. And I went, "Fair enough," and I didn't. And then later on, another officer from the guild said, "Oh, didn't you fancy coming along?" And I was like, and I just thought at that point, "Oh, do you know what? I can't be dealing with this. This is just obviously, you know, weirdness." And the thing that eventually did it, because what I was realizing, although it was an active guild, it wasn't really an organized guild. And I thought to myself, I'm never going to be able to get into raiding like this with these people. I can't even gear up. At this point, you know, I was getting towards the end of summer, and I'd been level 60 for quite a while. And I hadn't really got any decent gear. I'd got virtually none of my Lightforge set, which was the Paladin Dungeon set. And in terms of other gear, virtually none. I was learning nothing, and I was getting nowhere. And because what would frequently happen as well is the way dungeons used to work is you'd have to get into trade chat in Ironforge. You're talking about getting into a group. It'd take quite a while to get a group together, then physically get over there and do the dungeon. It used to take a while. And what would happen in this guild is you began there on Saturday and someone would say, "Oh, we should do a guild run to this dungeon." Great, fantastic. This is the whole purpose of a guild. And then they say, but, you know, I need to eat. So let's say half an hour. And then you'd go, okay, fine. And you'd do something for half an hour. And then half an hour, they wouldn't be there. And then you'd leave it a bit longer. And before you know it, there's an hour gone and they're still not there. They've just decided they can't be asked. They're going off to watch some telly or something without saying anything. So you wanted to do dungeons. You've already wasted an hour just because, well, let's do it in a guild group. Before you then realise you've got to go off and do it elsewhere. In a pug anyway. So there was an awful lot of that went on as well. So eventually I just thought, you know what? I'm better off not being in a guild. Because then at least I won't have people guilty. If I try and get into a pug, people aren't going to go, "Oh, no, we'll join a guild group." You just wait around. Because you wait around, it doesn't happen. So I thought I'm just better off being guildless. So I was. And I actually benefited like you wouldn't believe. As soon as I was guildless, I started joining more pugs. And I joined some quite spectacular ones. And I've talked about a couple of these things before. But for a start, I suddenly started getting my light rate started dropping and I was actually starting to win it. I mean, the boots from Strathern were a terrible nightmare because, you know, they dropped about 6 times before I got them myself. Because other people just kept... There was always another paladin there and they kept winning the roll on them. But I was in one particular Upper Blackrock Spire run. And what had happened actually, ironically, there was a proper organised guild that I tried to join. It was an actual raiding guild. It was the top guild on the realm. I eventually joined them towards the end of the expansion, but at this point, they basically knocked me back. They were a bit weird. Basically, I put my application in. They said, "We'll get back to you." And then it was a Saturday, and was it a Saturday or Sunday? I can't remember. But anyway, it was whatever it was. And I was in a Strathern run in a pug. And all of a sudden, the raid leader from this guild whispered, "Oh, can you come along to this raid?" And I said, "Okay, when?" I said, "Now." I said, "But I'm in a group." "Can't really, can I? I'm in a group." And he said, "Okay." So I carried on with the group. I actually got the Lightforge legs. So I got the dungeon tier legs out of it. So anyway, later on, he hadn't said anything. So the next day, I sort of whispered to him and said, "You know, what's going on, blah, blah, blah." And he said, "Well, you didn't seem very interested." And I went, "What?" He said, "Well, you didn't want to join the raid." And I was like, "But I was in a group." And he went, "Yeah." And that was it. And I just thought, "Oh, sod him then." And he was, you know, what? But anyway, so that was that. So I was still guildless. And but it was just as well, because if I had joined that raid, I'd have probably made a complete arse of myself. Because at the, you know, people know from Vanilla what you mostly did as a paladin was obviously buff people around. Okay, I understood that. And heal a bit. You did a bit of this and a bit of that, but mostly buffing with blessings, healing, whatever else after that you can make yourself useful with. Judgments, of course. Now, I didn't know how judgments worked actually, because the first time I got the judgment spell, which is really early on, I talked about that in a paladin video later, so I'm not going to go over it now. But should we say, just to, it was embarrassing. I completely misunderstood the way the spell worked. So I thought it was a terrible spell and didn't even put it on my bars. And healing, I didn't think we could heal at all because I could cast a couple of heals. It would do hardly anything and I'd run out of mana. So my attitude was you can't heal. So I was in this upper Blackrock Spire that I think I tried to talk about a few minutes ago and got sidetracked. And, it was 15 man then. I'm going through it. And there's a couple of healers there. Or I thought there were a couple of healers, like a druid and a priest. And it's all going swimmingly. But I noticed there's another paladin in there and he keeps standing back healing. And I thought, well, that's a bit odd. Shouldn't he be like me off-tanking? Isn't that the most useful thing to do? But I didn't say anything. It was a good group. Everyone was very nice. And we was going swimmingly. There was no difficulties. And we got to the end room. We had a little break, because that was quite common then as well. And I thought, I'll have a little look at the damage meter here, because I had some add-ons. I'd already learnt about add-ons, so I didn't have loads, but I had a damage meter. And so I looked at the healing on it. And bugger me, he was top of healing, this paladin. And I thought, what the hell? How is he managing that? And I thought it couldn't have been that the druid and the priest were bad, because that would be to say that we had virtually no healing in the group, but everything was going swimmingly. We weren't dying or anything like that. It was a great run. So I started to inspect him, and I noticed he had a lot of male intellect gear on and stuff with bonus healing and stuff like that on it. And I thought, oh my God, where's he got all this stuff from? And a cloak called Hide of the Wild. So I noted some of these things down and then started looking up on, what would it have been then? Thoughtbot then. On Thoughtbot. Started looking up where you could get these things from. And started targeting them. So I not only started by being guildless, rapidly progressing my gear, because I was getting into a lot more runs, but also learning that actually you can do this thing. So that when I eventually did join a raiding guild, which is called Keepers of Azeroth, when I eventually did join one, towards late Molten Core, they were, I didn't have to embarrass myself. I sort of did to begin with, because it wasn't swimming. My very first raid, I distinctly remember, came because basically TeamSpeak wasn't. I couldn't hear anyone on TeamSpeak. I could be heard, but I couldn't hear anyone. But no one really noticed for like 2 hours in, so I thought, well, I can't be doing too bad. And indeed, I wasn't. And so I knew about judgments then. I'd worked that out. I knew about healing. I'd got myself some gear for healing, some decent male gear. I'd got myself the Hide of the Hide of the Wild was a rare pattern drop that dropped from the Gordok shackled key box thing tied to the goblin in Diamore. And so I had to find someone on the server who could make it. It was quite a rare recipe. But first of all, obviously, I gathered all the materials. A lot of grinding to get all the materials for it. And then I found someone who would do it for a fee, of course. And they crafted me, so I had that as well. So I got myself... so I was properly ready. When I actually eventually did join a raiding guild, I was ready. I was okay. And I got right into it. And I started to look at other people in there as well and started to note who were the better ones and who were the ones I should start to examine what they were doing, and made a real study of, like, trying to get good at raiding when there weren't really guides about, and what guides there were I wouldn't have found anyway, because I didn't really actively, there might have been some communities out there, but I didn't really pay too much attention to them. It was mostly about looking at stuff in game and trying to improve from there. And yeah, so that's what got me into it eventually. So I'd found myself at a guild, an organised guild. And then what happened is, so when I joined them, they were pretty much done with Molten Core and the stuff like that. They were ready to move on to Tier 2. Because the guild itself had sort of been about before summer. But then they'd had a guild split. Like basically half their raiders buggered off to form another guild, which, again, I joined later on as well, but in TBC. And they were quite successful. So they'd had to rebuild, basically. And then, due to drama, I woke up. We were basically at Ragnaros. So we'd killed Onyxia and Major Domo Executus in like I thought I was lucky charm, because the first Onyxia raid I went to, the guild killed it for the first time ever. First time I went up, brought along to Major Domo, the guild killed it for the first time ever. I think after that they didn't dare leave me out. So, and then we're on to Ragnaros. But then all of a sudden, and this was a bit later, it was taking us a little while, Ragnaros. Woke up one Sunday and half the guild was gone again. It happened again with the same people nicking them as well. And they'd gone to try and form their own guild, another guild, which I've talked about before, but it's worth saying again. But I'll come to that in a moment. So basically the position we found ourselves in was half a guild, which and also it was some of the best geared members as well, with all the fire resist gear. So, and for Ragnaros, you needed sort of a certain amount of fire resistance for as many people as you could get. And there was no easy way of getting that, because you had to farm stuff from Molten Core itself. So the only way to do that was to keep farming Molten Core to get more of that stuff back. So that cut pretty much a full stop on the Ragnaros progress. So that, delayed us quite a long time. Now, the guild itself didn't do so well, the new guild that formed. They wanted to call themselves Phoenix Rising. We always found this amusing. But unfortunately, there was already a guild called Phoenix Rising on the server, so they couldn't call themselves that. Now, they'd already decided this was going to call, because you know how it goes. They want to imagine that, the guild they came from, Keeps of Azeroth, the one I was in, was dead, and they were going to rise from the ashes like a phoenix. That was the metaphor that was clear there. And the website, they got everything ready, Phoenix Rising, but then they couldn't do it and it was actually quite a well-known guild, so I don't know why they didn't even know it existed. Even I knew that, but anyway, so they couldn't call themselves that, so they called themselves PR instead, Phoenix Rising. But from there on in, we used to refer to them as Project Retard, and it ended up being prophetic as well, because they ended up being completely useless. And they didn't last more than about 5 months, because even though they had some good players there, they had some selfish players in there, and the people that had nicked them were very poor leaders. So it ended up being a complete disaster. So anyway, we eventually did. We killed Ragnaros. They basically made me an officer as well, because they needed a new officer, because half the officers are gone. And I had quite a good time from then on in, and really enjoyed the raiding on a very serious level. And at this point, this is when I had to sort of quit Warhammer and pretty much everything else, because you were raiding quite a lot. In fact, basically every day. Now, not every raid was compulsory, but I used to do those anyway. So, and it got to the point, once we were in about like back end of Blackwing Lair, when I was raiding every single evening and Sunday afternoons as well. It was very full on. But by that time, I was able to sort of combine it with work, and, because I was getting much more experience, lessons were quicker to plan. And I was able to, in the holidays, I was able to get a lot of stuff caught up on and use that, to move through each term. So I was using my time efficiently. But I wasn't doing a lot else, because it was pretty much full on, and it lasted like that for a little while. And that sort of got into, but what I got out of it, as I say, was, although I didn't enjoy individual raids over individual games of Warhammer or, some of the other things, it was there, it was accessible. You come home from work, I'd do whatever, get myself something to eat, something like that, get changed, go upstairs, log on, headphones on onto TeamSpeak. There were people on TeamSpeak to talk to, so it's a big social event, and stuff to do in the game, guild stuff as well. When I was an officer, there's organising, like planning, lots of stuff to do, lots of stuff that appealed to my desire to organise things, and like competitive spirit, and it sort of satisfied all those things in a very on-demand fashion, whereas Warhammer was a bit more ad hoc, and although there were things to plan for and get ready for, the number of times when I was unleashed was very few. It was like twice a year for the tournaments. Because although there were other lesser tournaments going on, they weren't the main meal. That was like the equivalent in Warcraft of doing dungeons, which I still did. They were nice, even doing pug dungeons. I used to pug dungeons actually to try and find some likely candidates to join us, some good raiders. To my everlasting shame, I shouldn't really admit to this, but on one such occasion, I found a really good warlock in... God, where was it? It was Lower Blackrock Spire. Was it? Yes, it was. Lower Blackrock Spire. Found a really good warlock. And, you know, and I spent with the warlock officer in the guild a good 2 hours convincing him to join, poaching him, basically, is what people would call it now. Headhunting, I used to call it. Because he was in a guild already. But, you know, tough. And to my everlasting shame, he was a gnome. But at the time, you see, I didn't have quite the same attitude about gnomes that I do now. They were still, you know, vaguely ridiculous, of course. I couldn't take them seriously. But, you know, I didn't have quite the disdain for them that I do now. I tolerated them at that time. Yeah. But anyway, so that's how I got into it. And from there on in, basically, I was always just wanting to raid. That was the main thing. And because it was so full on, especially in those first few years of World of Warcraft, where even moderate guilds used to spend a lot of time raiding and you know, and doing dungeons and things like that, everything else sort of fell away, you know, really. And it was basically everything I did. And then when Wrath came out, at that start of that, I was in the most progress guild I'd ever been in and have ever been in since. And I was appalled by it. I mean, even at the time, I was very much focused on the game. I didn't used to do a lot of stuff outside of it, like community-wise. You know, so I didn't, for example, even though I'd played the Wrath beta, I didn't know what was coming. So what happened was, at the start of Wrath, the first dungeon was a bastardized version of Naxxramas, the tier 7. It was a terrible shell. There's no real comparison, you know, and you can understand people who, you know, when people will say, and I will say the same, how difficult Naxx was, the original Naxx, and people will look at Naxx in tier 7 and go, oh, no, you're just thinking that because, you know, the game just wasn't as complex back then and all that rubbish. No, it was nothing like it. The bosses looks the same. There, the similarity ends. There was nothing. Even the mechanics are significantly different. But anyway, doesn't matter about that. The point is that I had, again, fitting it around work, as I have to do for every expansion launch, apart from the one coming, is I had to level around work. So it took me a while to get leveled up. But when I'd got leveled up, you know, there was enough of a raid for us to go and do Naxxramas. So we did Naxxramas and cleared it. Just cleared it all. The previous night, a smaller group had gone and cleared one wing. You know, without the full... How many was it needed then? 25, wasn't it? There was... Actually, that's when 10 and 25 man came out. But 25 man was more difficult and gave the better rewards. So it's obviously 25 man that we did. So a smaller group had gone in and cleared one wing. I mean, that straight away told you there's something not right here. And then the next night, we cleared the rest of it, including Kel'Thuzad. And then the next couple of raids, we did Obsidian Sanctum and Malagus's Lair. So within a few days of dinging, I'd cleared all the raid bosses in the game. Now, bear in mind, raiding was my main reason for playing WoW. By the time Wrath had come out, there were other MMOs, and I dipped into a few of them, and some of them had layered charms, and it was like, oh, wouldn't it be nice, you know, to try a few different things? But raiding was so important to me that, no, this will take precedence. But now, all of a sudden, we have a situation where I level, and then in a few days, the raid's dead. And they brought in, at the same time as Wrath, achievements. So there were achievements to do in the raid. Now they were more challenging than actually killing the bosses. So the idea of doing the achievements and getting your thing, getting your Proto Drake mount, the black Proto Drake mount, and there was another one for 10 man and stuff like that. And then, so that became the challenge, getting the Immortal title, which we got. And I was looking at it and I'm thinking, is this it now? And because I had no reason to know that just around the corner was going to come Ulduar, which is what many people have described as the best raid. As some people will certainly say one of the best. I mean, having looked at it since, I can understand why people would say that. I didn't get to experience it because I didn't know that was coming. I just looked at the evidence in my own eyes and thought, is this the pattern now for raiding? Is it now getting so casual friendly they can't even be asked to put challenging raids in? Is this how it's going to be now? And I had no reason to believe otherwise. So I thought, well, I'm not doing this. It's not worth it. So I basically made the decision I was going to quit the game. This wasn't I'm not going to raid anymore, because if I wasn't going to raid anymore, well, I'd rather do other things. And I went off and did Lord of the Rings Online, Warhammer Online, and, other things. So I basically quit the game. I did come crawling back later on. But that was because my computer exploded. At a time when I couldn't afford to, basically just the graphics card, not the whole computer. I couldn't afford to replace it with a decent one. I had to get a cheap one. The cheap one would not run, it wouldn't run Lord of the Rings Online very well, and it wouldn't run Warhammer Online at all. If I was in any populated areas, it was impossible. It wasn't just slow, it was impossible to do anything. And because large-scale PvP was the big fun thing in that game, pointless. So I eventually came back to WoW. A friend of mine had also come back to it, the one who initially got me into the game, actually, to join a very casual Horde guild. So I ended up doing that. And then stopped again when actually I had a more serious problem with my computer. And then I'd started a new job and I got a new partner and stuff like that. So it all fell by the wayside. And then I just, again, bitten by the bug, and I just thought, do you know what? Because at the time, I hadn't fallen back into anything else that was giving me that sense of a competitive hobby, a serious hobby. I had none. And I thought, well, I missed that. And World of Warcraft became the obvious one again, because by this time it became more the norm. You didn't do a ridiculous amount of raiding nights. So I came back at the end of Cataclysm with the intention of, because it was just before Dragon Soul, and I had the intention of just getting into the game, and then when the next expansion came out, then trying to find a raiding guild. But just find my feet first of all. But in the event, I found a raiding guild beforehand. Not a very advanced one, of course, not a very progressive one, but nonetheless one that did the hard mode raiding, the heroic raiding. So I did Dragon Soul with them. And and it sort of went on from there. And ever since then, I've been doing the hard mode raiding again. And again, it's always, I mean, obviously work has to come first. That's what pays the bills. And in my particular job as well, people's lives depend upon me doing a good job as well. So that will always come top priority. But second priority has always been raiding. And because at certain times that raiding eats up all your spare time, it ebbs and flows. That basically meant that I was never able to even find another hobby that I might want to take seriously. Because I knew whatever I got into would have to stop the instant that World of Warcraft demanded more time of me. It's a harsh mistress, World of Warcraft, as an endgame raider sometimes. Not all times, but sometimes. So there we are, and that sort of brings it up to present day. So what I will intend to do in my rambling way next week is to lay out the benefits I've got from raiding and the drawbacks, which now, as I say, that balance has tipped to the point where I think the drawbacks are too much. I'm going to sort of lay those out next week. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then don't forget to give it a like. Throw some comments down below. I like reading those. And until next time, I'll see you later.